Hey everyone, welcome to After the Buzzer. This is the video series in relation to our podcast, Game Tape Rewind, um, posted on our Facebook and Instagram page. And in this series, we try to talk about a topic that is related to the episode of Game Tape Rewind, but either we ran out of time or the conversation would have been better suited for a video format. In this case, our episode this week was related to Kobe Bryant. We were releasing it on the episode on the 1 year anniversary of his tragic death, and we kind of talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but there's definitely more details to be shared here. So the topic for this episode is when you think back to your opinion of Kobe throughout the course of his career, and maybe even after, um, would you fall on more of the you loved him or hated him side?
I think if you're going to take an average and you had to be under five or over five, I'm definitely probably on the negative side, only because, but it was an admiration of hate in a way. It certainly was
Mm,
a respect. And that's simply, and you're going to be somewhat similar, is my guess, because of the teams that we loved and having to unfortunately deal with Kobe Bryant at some point in time. Pretty well documented. I was a really, really big Phoenix Suns fan for a long time until the team totally died. And now it's back. Good for them. I actually have my Steve Nash jersey. I thought about maybe putting that on for this segment, but it's fine too. Uh, for Kobe to constantly be a threat in the West is a big problem because it is the ultimate boogeyman, I think, in my NBA journey, maybe beside LeBron. And as a Suns fan, we did get the best of Kobe during the more weak era of the Lakers between the two dynasties, per se. And, having a historic coming back from 3-1 deficit against the Lakers and winning a conference playoff against them. And then the next year doing it again, but demolishing them in the first round 4-1. So, things were looking good for the Suns for a little while. Of course, we never made enough noise at that time. But then comes, the next set of playoffs in 2010 where we play the Lakers and probably, and you mentioned it too, our best chance to win a finals seemingly at that
definitely.
time, the
Yeah.
Suns. Just a hell of a team. Amari Stoudemire is, one of the best players in the world at that point. Steve Nash is, passer extraordinaire. And Kobe just shuts the entire team up. I mean, they end up winning the series 4-2. He's the leading scorer in, I think, every single game but one. I think Pau Gasol maybe in game 1 or 2 is the leading scorer in that series. And he just has a phenomenal series. I think his average is here. Let's see, 30 rounding up, 34 points a game, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, chip and a steal and a block. It's pretty
Is
hard to
that
beat
any
a
good?
team when let me check my notes. That looks pretty good.
Yeah.
So for me, certainly because of that, because you want your team to be there, and a lot of times, unfortunately, in sports, it's all due to the fact of who do you come across at what time in your playoff journey. And unfortunately for the Suns, too, that is my favorite team ever in NBA history. We had to deal with the Lakers and Kobe Bryant during their revival, and during probably what I would consider his greatest skill level was probably around right there when he was just aging enough, but he really had it. Obviously, 34 points per game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, I'm going to go with hate just enough.
Okay. Um, Mine was definitely in the same realm as yours, though it did evolve over the course of his career. You mentioned the teams we root for fell to his hands. The Nets lost in their first NBA Finals, got swept. Kobe was a killer in that series, even though Shaq got the MVP. Um, and we never really seemed to beat him. But ultimately, after those teams that made the finals, it didn't really become part of the conversation anyway. The Nets had a bevy of issues of their own. Um, but for me, I think, it was always like, I hated how arrogant he seemed. I hated how good he always was. I hated, a lot of the things about him as a player, mostly stemming from respect because I just couldn't stand how good he was. Um, that did start to change a little bit in 2008. We mentioned on the podcast he played through a pretty bad fracture on his hand for the second half of the 2008 season. But that year was also the USA Redeem Team, and this was going to be his first appearance with the U.S. national team. He had to sit out previous Olympics for other reasons. And he had mentioned that he was going to put off surgery until after that was over, until after the Olympics was over, so that he could play. And I really respected that. I thought that was commitment to something that he didn't necessarily need to, but he saw the vision for that team, that Redeem team, wanted to be a part of it, wanted to be a veteran leader. And he played through that injury. And ultimately, I distinctly remember in the finals against Spain, it was a pretty back and forth game for most of it. And he ended up scoring 13 of his 20 points in the fourth quarter. Again, came up incredibly clutch, offense and defense. He hit a huge 4-point play with a few minutes left to put the U.S. up, I think, 10 or 11 or something that kind of iced the game a little bit. And I had tremendous respect for that. And it was finally being able to root for Kobe as somebody on the team that I wanted to win, which had never entered my thought process before. Um, Back in the NBA, I still didn't root for the Lakers throughout any of that time, but at least the seed was planted. And as we started to play basketball at a more competitive level, you got to see, hear about the work ethic and see the commitment to his craft. And that's something that ultimately, the fierce hatred of somebody kind of fades away, especially as they get a little bit later into their career. To the point where I mentioned this on the podcast, my favorite moment of his was his final game, just the ultimate display of who he was as a person and as a player, going out, completely unnecessarily putting up 60 points in a game he could have sat out the fourth quarter and got his standing ovation and checked out with 5 minutes left and whatever. But he said, no, I'm going to go win this game for us in a completely meaningless game. It made me feel a little bit, less anger at when he eventually said, about refusing to play for the Nets if he was drafted by them. Later after he retired, he said, no, I was just being a 17-year-old kid. I probably would have played for him. And wondering what could have been. But I think, at this point, like I said, it helped, it helped with that revelation a little bit.
I think as time goes by, and this will continue as well, time is going to be very kind to Kobe Bryant, and for many different reasons. But it's hard, especially later in a career, to root against somebody. That's probably going to be a theme for a lot of the guys, and we're coming up against this new era of the NBA, pushing some of the older guys out. So we might have some of these moments again soon, but I'll put down a lot of money we won't have anything like that final game with Kobe Bryant dropping 60. So that's, you can't write it any better than that. And maybe it's a recency bias, but that takes that needle pretty back to a happy medium for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let us know what you think. Were you a fan? Did you hate him like us for the better part of his career? I know we're going to cross the entire spectrum here. So let us know in the comments. Be sure to check out Game Tape Rewind podcast, where you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just search Game Tape Rewind and you'll find us. We appreciate you watching, and we will talk to you next time.